Recording in progress. Okay, doke. Feet hip width apart, parallel, pointing forwards or slightly turned out. Turning slowly, gently in the middle of your body. See if I put my hand there, you'll see the movement there. Just letting your arms swing nice and loosely. Just feel the weight of your arms hanging from your shoulders. Let that weight sort of pull your shoulders down towards your rib cage. And then your rib cage sort of dropping down towards your hips. And your hips just dropping back, down. So this will seem to move slightly down towards your ankles. So just being aware of the feeling of the weight of your whole body in your feet. Leaving your upper body very loose. Nice steady rhythm as you move. So that loose feeling gives your arms that slightly sort of floppy feeling. As though your body was just emptying of any sort of resistance to the movement. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. And then just use an image like moving through water, or so the air were a little bit thicker around you than you might expect it to be, or as though you were doing this facing a wind coming at you. Alternatively, you could imagine you've got sort of one of these elastic lycra type suits on, so that there isn't that sort of same floppiness, but still retaining that loose quality, but having to put a little bit more intention in terms of effort into making sure that your arms go where they want to go, because you want the sort of resistance that means that if I were to turn my body like this, exaggerated, the arm would be delayed before it came around. I'd have to put effort into pulling the arm around. Like if you're in water, if you're in the sea or in the swimming pool and you move that way, this arm will tend to float behind unless you have an idea that it's going to come with you. And what we want is for that to be simultaneous with the actual movement. In this way, we program our body. Remember that the way that we sense information about the world in all its types, hearing, touch, so on and so forth, is through the medium of the nervous system and the brain. So if you can engage with that process through your intention, through the use of imagery in one way or another, then you actually encourage your body to move differently. So if I gave you a box, it happens all the time actually. People come to deliver stuff at the door, and there's a ring at the doorbell. There's somebody standing there with a box in their hands. They say, "Here, this is yours," and you take it. You go, "Oh, thanks," sort of thing, because it looked as though it was light. Or sometimes it might happen the other way around. You go to pick up a box, think, well, I bet that's a heavy one. Oh no, it's not, because you've actually moved in a particular way, making an assumption about the weight that you were going to be moving, and so on, so on and so forth. So this is something that we can become familiar with and aware of, and something that we can influence. And the way that we want to move in Tai Chi is with that assumption, shall we call it, that there's always a slight resistance to the movement. And through that, just the development of a sense of connection and inner strength in the body. In fact, there is resistance to the movement. The air around you resists the movement. It's just that we don't notice it. We're so familiar with it, it's always been there. Times when you might notice it, if you get on a push bike or motorbike or something like that, and you move off. And I've done this many times on my bike. Think, oh, it's a nice day. I'll go for a ride. You go along, and suddenly you can feel the resistance of the air. And think, well, hold on, there's no wind. Obviously, if there's a strong wind, but the faster you go, the stronger the resistance. So the air is in fact resisting our movements. Pull of gravity is resisting our attempts to remain upright, and so on and so forth. So what we're really doing is trying to encourage ourselves to become more sensitive to what's already there. We're using an image to heighten the effect, but the effect is already there because there is resistance around us in one way or another. This changes the nature of our movement. More connected means more flow, the sense of the energy moving more harmoniously, more of the body being used in any one particular movement, less strain on any one particular part of the body. One interesting way to play with this, if it's not making sense, is next time there's a sort of brisk wind. Obviously, don't go out when it's sort of like a hurricane force gale or something like that. But just go out, face into the wind, and start to do this exercise, and then take some shelter and try it again, and compare the two sensations. You can do that with any of the exercises, really, but you know, this is always a good practice to review these kind of aspects of Tai Chi in the preparatory movements. And just raising your arms. Because everything is also supposed to be done in a very relaxed way, we don't want any sense of straining in the muscles. We also try to consciously relax those muscles over which we do have a fair amount of direct control. So that could be, you know, say that the triceps and biceps, it could be the pectoral muscles, the glutes and the buttocks, the quadriceps. When we feel them straining, we just consciously and deliberately try to relax them. And gradually they condition so that they can take whatever load is being offered to them. Just let your hands drop down there, give your legs a shake. And it's almost as though the effect of the movement soaks through them. And so we start to work with tendons and ligaments, with skeletal muscle, and even down to the bones, and even the movement itself, as though the flow becomes stronger. My feeling about that is that the difference in the quality of the movement is akin to what I feel is the difference between feeling a soft breeze on my skin and feeling water flow over my skin. It has a more sort of tenuous, or not tenuous, but tensile quality about it. So just letting your hips sink back a little bit more, making a point of trying to release in the base of your spine, so you allow your pelvis to adjust and push up. You do need to try and get that sense of release in here in the lower back, around the hips. Because if you don't, if I stiffen up there, I start to be pulled back, and inevitably I would do something unconsciously to try and stop that happening, because there'll be this sense of beginning to fall or to stumble in one way or another, one direction or another. And that will throw my posture out. So there's many things that start to come together in the overall movement. Excuse me. And after a while, you get used to this process of just observing and then analyzing things. You can start to tell, oh, this isn't right, or this isn't right. You may notice a hip being tight, or with a tension in your back or your legs or something like that. And just gradually bringing about a sense of balance there. Not everything is just going to disappear easily, of course, but quite a lot of the stuff, especially at the beginning of a session, will work its way through for you. Bringing your hands around as though you're cradling the ball, pushing up and settling down. The body expanding and contracting. Try and avoid a very common error when we do this exercise is that people will start doing this. This is exaggerated, but I do see people doing this quite a lot. And the basic problem, I think, is that they're thinking about the arms. They're thinking about, I've got to move my arms. And actually, what we want to do is to leave that idea behind and start to think about this movement here. Sinking down and pushing up. Moving something in the upper part of the body. So the idea of lifting something heavy is quite appropriate, as long as you know how to lift. If you've had training or experience of lifting anything heavy in whatever context, you'll know that the principle is always use your legs to do the lifting, not your back or your arms. So up your back and into your shoulders and down into your arms. Quite a soft feeling. And if you actually look at the range of travel that my arms are making, they go from about here to about there. So rough, no higher than the top of my chest, no lower than about level with my navel. Give or take a little bit, but not up here. And not right down there. So that's the movement compared to my body, but obviously when that's put together with the movement up and down of my body, the actual distance traveled is going to be further. And just see if you can feel the build-up of the movement, pushing up from the legs, a kind of expansion working up through your body. You go back a little bit, which if we make the change now to the Wild Goose, and the intent is for our arms to come out to the sides here, then we feel that expansion just moving up a little bit higher, the level of the solar plexus, bottom of the rib cage, and not just in the front of our body, either in our sides and our back. And then change into part of the clouds. feeling expansion build again. So it starts in the belly, goes to the solar plexus, and then higher up again. Nice and smoothly. Don't strain for your hands to go up high. So ideally, you'll have a sense of curiosity rather than, oh, my hands have got to go here. It should be, well, if I do this with my legs and I feel that expansion going up through my body, where do my hands end up? Now go back to the first one and do these in a series of 3. So first, rooting down, doing expansion, your belly, lower back, and then change to the wild goose, belly, lower back, and up into the solar plexus. And then belly, solar plexus, and higher up again. So the expansion builds upwards through our body, coming from our legs and feet always. But think about the upper body, that expansion, belly, solar plexus, chest is actually the same order, the same process that we want to try and build into our breathing. So the in-breath starts with the expansion in our belly. So with this exercise, one thing you can try is every time you do part in the cloud, so that's every third movement, paying attention just to that expansion and contraction in the first 2. But when you get to here, if it's comfortable for you, just take a breath in, and in the back of your mind, still aware of that expansion up through your body. What's sometimes referred to as bellows breathing or abdominal breathing. The term bellows comes from the idea that if you use a bellows, you pull on the handles and widen the handles and suck the air in rather than strain to sort of blow the air into the bellows. So our breathing action should feel more like using a bellows than, say, blowing into a balloon. It's important to realize that this is very, very linked in with our posture. If, for instance, you've got the habit, which most of us do, of pulling your belly in, then that means that those muscles in the belly that we want to try and engage with the breathing process are fully occupied with whatever reason we're pulling the belly in for. So they're less likely, you can't both pull them in and let them expand at the same time easily. And we neutralize that need for straining in the belly, pulling the belly in through good posture. Maybe this is the last one. A dragon plucks the stars from the sky. That same expansion, pushing upwards. And so another aspect of this is that from a relatively small movement in our hips, I mean, if you watch from the side, when I push up, my hips move, I don't know, they don't move very far. They certainly don't move as far as my hand moves. So the movement will build up to the side of my body, through ribs, every part of that expanding and contracting. Sometimes I have an image with this exercise that it's like I've got a big elastic band and I'm standing on one end of it. And what I'm doing is I'm pulling on the other end to make it extend out and then letting it contract slowly. Point there being that when you pull on an elastic band, it extends all the way through its length equally. If it doesn't, then it's probably because it's an old weak elastic band and it will snap at the point where it doesn't expand. And in the same way, it's almost, you could almost imagine it sort of cell by cell through your body, each cell between the sole of your foot and the tips of your fingers, expanding just a little bit, but the sum total of the expansion ended up quite large. One more of these on each side. So the same is true, just come back into this settled posture. When I turn here, I'm not actually turning very far. I'm going to come closer so you can see, you won't lose sight of my feet. I turn just a little bit here. You see, my hand's actually not moving that far. And at the moment, if I put my hand on my chest, or actually I'll put my hand on my solar plexus, it's moving the same distance. But now I turn a little bit here, and then I turn a little bit more. So now this hand, my top hand, has moved a little bit further. I'm exaggerating this a little bit so you can see. So now there's this sort of pulling between those two regions of the body. What I'm not trying to do is this. I'm not going too far. See now, it's throwing my posture out, it's throwing my chest out. So just a little bit. And then if I say put my hand in the middle of my chest, then here, that too will move a little bit further. Not much, because I can't actually move it very far before I get a stiffening in my upper back. If you imagine that happening at minute levels, progressing up through the body, then it means that in the end, my shoulders can move further, but I can stand like this quite comfortably. I go the other way, I can stand like this quite comfortably. But if I just move my shoulders, I get to here and I'm already stiff, and I'm also falling backwards. So this is with my knees locked back and everything. And all I'm doing is trying to move in the upper part of my body. I can actually, if I sink down and I turn, I can move quite a long way here, and it's reasonably comfortable. It's okay. And of course, if my hands are out to my sides, then they're radiating out from my shoulders. So the actual distance that they're moving on the edge of the circle is greater again. So the movement builds from the ground, from our center. Bring your hands to your sides and pushing in four directions. Once again, we have the idea that no one part of the body is overloaded. And we can become very, very sensitive to that quality of being overloaded. I would associate a kind of gripping, tightening feeling in my body with any part of my body that is taken beyond its capacity. So we want to find a balance. We want to increase that capacity, but how we increase it in Tai Chi is actually quite different. We do it through this process of cultivation. rather than straining. From a martial point of view, from the point of view of the partner work in Tai Chi, what that means is if somebody pushes you, they push from their feet. And it comes up through their legs, through the spine in the kind of way that we've been looking at. And the last part of the body to get involved in the push in any kind of direct way would be your arms, would be the arms pushing you. By that time, it's like trying to stop a wave as it crashes into the beach. 90% of the power is already there, if not more. So by the time, if all you're doing is paying attention to their arms, by the time you've registered that they're trying to push you, it's too late. So it's from a kind of martial point of view that is tactically a very sound way to approach things. But there's other, the significance of it goes way beyond that, of course. I'm around. For instance, I'm sure we've all sort of like turned and reached behind ourselves to pick up something, and suddenly go, oh, because you pulled a muscle or something like that. If you turn like this, you're a lot less likely to do that. Now changing. Ideally, every movement we make will follow this principle. Whether you're turning, whether it's extension upwards or outwards, it's always in one way or another, building up from the center of the body, down into the ground, up through the body to the sides, and so on and so forth. If you can start to feel a movement like this in that way, in my experience, you'll find it's a lot softer on your shoulder and your back. And then if it's comfortable, add the turn. And what I'm finding is when I think of it in this way, with this exercise, I'm turning much more. I always used to find that it was a bit of a pull in my back. But since I've started thinking of the movement like this, I'm finding that there's actually much less of a pull. And then change sides. The turn. And then round about in the middle of the leg. hips going back. And then dropping down. One more time. And then polishing the table. Turning, feeling the back of your body moving across, push back, and then swing your hips around to the other side. Very carefully coming back. One more in each direction. Good. Drop your hands down. Shake out. So if we practice like this, then eventually we just reform how we move generally. Example I sometimes give to people, and maybe given it to both of you, I'm not sure. It's worth thinking about. Was once a few years ago when somebody asked me to open a jar. You know how jar lids get stuck, and I wasn't really thinking about it. I was chatting to him. I took hold of the jar and went to open it, and suddenly realised I was doing this. I'm exaggerating, but I could feel my hip moving. I wasn't just using my arm. I was doing this kind of movement, using the whole body. I was quite pleased. They weren't, because they just looked at me and said, "Are you going to open it or not?" Because I was suddenly quite fascinated by this. It doesn't sound that significant, but I've met many older people who said that their wrists have gotten too weak to open a jar, which is quite a debilitating thing. So if we can work on this idea, and remember we started with that loose feeling, and then the idea of moving through water and whatever thicker medium, and becoming more aware of those connections in the body, that way of moving becomes hardwired. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've still got a long way to go, as my teachers would doubtless say, but the idea is there so that we can begin to build on those ideas and replace old habits of movement. It's worth realizing that we all tend to sort of like revert to doing the hands, and that's all, and that's all that we do. So we want to constantly remind ourselves to do that. Now, still in the parallel stance. Also, sinking down and going back to the Wild Goose for a moment. So, in this movement, you see there, I can't do this hand, but this hand is just slightly in front of my body. It's not here, which will tighten the chest, it's there. So, from the side, roughly speaking, I would think of my little or my ring finger kind of in line with my ear, giving the front of the body that slightly, the chest, that slightly concave feeling, as it used to be described. But now this time, if as I push up, I turn, that redirects my hands. They don't switch their position. They don't pull behind like that. So my little finger is still in line with my ear on that side and on that side, but my whole body has turned. And we can apply that incremental turn going up the body. With this one, unlike with the Wild Goose, just for a moment here, your hands are hanging all the way down. And at that point, just see if you can still register the weight of your arms pulling on your shoulders. As with the Wild Goose, as your hands come up, there's a slight feeling here of your elbow dropping down. What my first teacher, Bronwyn Hipkin, used to describe as lazy elbows. They can't be bothered to move up. And so that tendency for your elbow to drop here, if I exaggerate, this happens as the hips go down, and that pulls your fingers down. This time, turning, and let the rear elbow drop down a lot further, so your rear hand arrives at your shoulder. Turn the front hand palm up and press through. Just let the rear hand continue to swing, let the elbow drop. It will arrive at your shoulder and you push through. There's a slight dip down in your fingers so that here, the palms of the hand almost face each other. Some people do that very, very particularly. They'll actually have this movement and they imagine holding the ball at that point. The way that I do it sort of moves towards that, but I would guess at this point, it's probably more like I've got a ball in my front hand and I'm coming down to push the ball off with my rear hand. But here, at this stage, it very much has the feel of the Wild Goose. It's nice and open in the chest. I've seen this exercise recommended for sort of like congestion in your chest and so on and so forth. I can see why, although I think you'd have to do the exercise properly to really make that work. But remember, you know, if when we were doing a previous exercise, I mentioned the breathing. If you can get that sense of expansion through belly, solar plexus, let your rib cage really expand without straining, then it creates a sort of a vacuum. It just means that your lungs can begin to fill up much more. And in the same way, they can expand downwards into the solar plexus. So potentially there's the possibility of here, breathing in, this whole of the upper body expanding, and then you breathe out. In practice, again, we recognize that the posture that we're taking, the way that we're moving, are all going to influence that. So try it and see. You'll probably find that there's some sort of stiffening up process at some point. And should never force that. So you know, don't feel you have to do it every time. But if every now and then you think about that, then gradually that too will become second nature to you. Good, and shake hands. So these different ideas connect. You know, the idea about how we breathe, building from the belly upwards, reflects how we want to move, and it reflects the range of the movement. This exercise, when it's translated into a different stance, for instance, if I was going to push somebody with it, I would come back here. Then actually, I would get to this position, and if they're against my hand, I would be doing all of this first before the arm picked up on the movement. So I'm already pushing them. At that point, the arm just completes the movement. Again, it's like a wave on the beach. When the wave hits you, it can be quite powerful, but it probably started, I don't know, several miles out at sea with just a slight swell or something like that, and it built as it came in shore. So there's this build up of the range of movement, of the power, of the energy of the movement when our posture allows that, as well as things like the breath. So now 1 foot forwards. So one of the basic principles in Tai Chi is that shoulders are above the hips. This is something that we get taught frequently. But actually what I'm suggesting is that it's not always the case. That sometimes if I were to turn, now my shoulder clearly isn't above my hip, and yet it feels okay. If I go to here, it's tightened up. So what applying that idea of shoulders in line with the hips does for me is it makes me aware of a feeling of a possibility of moving without the straining. And in Chen style Tai Chi, there are two interpretations of that idea. One is to say that your shoulders are in line with your hips. The other is to say that there's a harmony between the shoulders and the hips. I think this is a progression from a strict kind of like geometrical analysis of posture into something that is much more intuitive. You can move, we're not rigid machines. We can move out of line to a certain degree. And there's many factors that will affect to what degree we can actually do that. But we become more reliant on the feeling and our sense of an intuitive awareness than we do the sort of mathematics of it. Raising your toes and your heel. When I learned to drive, I was told when the engine revolutions get to a certain point, that's when you change gear. And then when they get to another point, you change gear again. That was how it was explained to me. And yet, that's not what we do. We don't think, oh, I've reached such and such a speed or something like that. I'll change. You kind of know when it's the right time to change gear. Same thing with riding the bike. And then stepping in. And like with driving a car, judging that is there's a number of different factors. In the car, it might be, what the other traffic was doing, whether you're on a gradient, state of the engine. I mean, just all sorts of things. How much you were pushing on the accelerator and so on and so forth. And in the same way in Tai Chi, there's many different elements that will define exactly at any particular point how far you move. It's not going to be the same every time. And on the other side. And this isn't to suggest that it's all in the mind, or it's all about the mind. I'm talking about your awareness of what's happening physically in your body. And then raising your toes and your heel. So this is very related to something I was talking about, I think last week, the week before, when we had this sort of massive heat wave. And literally the air around you does feel thicker, and it is harder work to move through it. And I use this phrase, 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds. I think it's not just one lot of 4 ounces, it's a whole series of 4 ounces moving up through the body. But again, it's not a question of straining. And then stepping through, back. So what's supporting your body when you do this, when you're standing on one leg, isn't just sort of, well, one part of your body. This is why I always say to people, this isn't an exercise in standing on one leg. It's an exercise in maintaining the alignment and the stability of our body. Take a few steps forwards or backwards. And then in the other direction. If you think about a movement like fisherman cast a net, which we're doing next, from here I go forwards and my arm extends out in the same way. So it's almost like the angle between the top of my arm and my chest increases. It lengthens between shoulder and elbow, between elbow and wrist, between wrists and fingers. Like a cat. You ever watched a cat? When it's trying to get somewhere where it's not supposed to, it will hold its body still, and one arm will extend, one leg will extend out very, very slowly, and then it will move its body in, and so on and so forth. So we sort of feel our way outwards from the ground, feeling that connection. Or again, it's like, you know, if I do this, I could do this. I could imagine the elastic band again underneath my rear foot. I'm just trying to stretch it out. How to put a little bit extra behind it. Remember that when we imagine moving against resistance, just as when we move against resistance in real terms, then our body will generally connect well. So have your right foot forwards. Start with fisherman cast a net. One of the reasons I'm so fond of fisherman cast a net is because it's a really good exercise for helping to just work with some of these quite difficult ideas. It's a very simple exercise. And so you can very quickly get to a point where you're able to just observe the movement. Is there a tightening across your shoulders as your arms extend or whatever? One more time. And then pushing a wave, or if you prefer the wave pushing. I was talking about the wave coming in to the beach before. And then repulsing the monkey. As you go back, your left hand will drop down, you turn. So combining that earlier exercise with transfer of the weight. Just be patient, rest on the front leg until both hands are in position, and then move and turn. And that will move your arms for you. Again, just waiting and pushing through. Step in. So now you're in this position. You feel back with the foot. As you settle into the back foot here, you bring the front foot in, and then again it pushes out cat-like. And shake out. Left foot forward, so fisherman casting out. And then pushing away. And pulsing the monkey. It's important to keep the front hand in position until your rear hand is ready to take over. And of course, if we follow the movement correctly, then that's what will happen anyway, because the hands won't actually change position until our body starts moving and turning, and then they'll both move at the same time. But it's a very common error with this movement to do something like here and then to drop that hand down or to pull it back prematurely. And stepping in. And bring your feet parallel. Excellent. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Arm. Other side. And your back. Around your hips. touch on your belly, the upper part of your chest. So feet parallel again. Hips dropping back and then dropping down a little bit further, and embrace tiger, return to the mountain. And again, just trying to feel that everything about you expands and then contracts in harmony. In particular, that sense of just coming back to the ground, coming back to your root, coming back to the mountain, however you think of it. Come around after this one. And stand. Give your legs a shake. Lovely. Thank you very much. So